afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's talk on how to deliver successful pricing projects in B2B. Bear with me. Right, my name's Tim Ham. I've worked in pricing for 22 years, and in that time I've done a range of B2B and B2C pricing, probably sort of about 50% of each. And I spent some of that time working in industry, leading pricing functions, and some of that time in consulting. I've led many projects of one form or another, and generally they've gone pretty well, but not universally. I've learned a few things along the way, and today's all about sharing some of those things with you. And I'm joined by my colleague David Boothman, who you can see on the slide, who will be doing much of the presenting along with me, and also my colleague Guillaume Alexandre. Collectively, David and Guillaume have got about 35 years, predominantly in B2B pricing. And Guillaume will join us for the Q&A session at the end. Right, so in terms of today's agenda, or today's session, we're going to spend 20 to 25 minutes sharing with you what we've learned in terms of key determinants for success, which we've reduced down to 10 lessons, and we'll step through those. At the end, there's a Q&A session, and if you've got any questions, please do post them in the webinar chat at any point through the webinar, and Julian may interject at some point and interrupt with any questions as if they sort of pertain to the bit we're talking about at that point. We've also put in one of our pricing guides into the webinar chat. So if you go to the chat function, you can download that webinar, and it is, of course, about B2B pricing. Okay. So we've found our conversations about B2B pricing have kind of evolved over the last 5 years or so, and they've really evolved from much more conversations from is the value in pricing and should we worry about pricing or should we invest more time in pricing to much more along the lines of what should I do and how do I make sure these projects are successful? Because as you will all know, pricing is pretty potent, and the critical thing is, actually, despite having a good team or employing consultants sometimes, coming up with the right solution is a part of it, but is only part of it, and there's many reasons why that solution may not come to fruition. And a lot of what we're going to talk to you about this afternoon is exactly that and some of those elements. So we've got one slide on Pearson Ham, and this is that slide. Our mission is to help clients be more successful through better pricing. And being a specialist is great, it gives us real depth of pricing. But the other important element of our mission is to help clients be more successful. And our mission is not to deliver great pricing work. Delivering great pricing work is not enough. There are plenty of other reasons why pricing projects can succeed or fail. And we do lots of clever stuff in behavioral science and machine learning. And in fact, the next webinar in a week's time is about developing commercial models. And there's kind of lots of clever techniques that we use around that. It's quite technical. This webinar this afternoon is much less technical, actually. It's much more about behaviors and processes, because these are often the reasons why projects succeed or fail. And that's what we're therefore going to be focusing many of the lessons on in the next few minutes. So we're going to share 10 essential elements. We're going to talk about the common reasons for disappointing outcomes. We're going to talk about what we think you should do or could do to manage them. These 10 elements fall into 3 areas. The first one being about strategy and objectives. The second one being about the enablers of success. And then the third one being around execution and delivery. I'm now going to hand over to David, who's going to talk through some of those areas.
Great, thanks, Tim. Well, everybody, I'm David Boothman, and like Tim, I've worked in commercial and pricing roles in retail and B2B for over 20 years now. I started my career back in Dixon's and have held senior commercial and pricing roles in several retailers, including Argos, Homebase, Wickes, and Bath Store over the years. Before joining Pearson Ham, I established an industry-leading B2B pricing function within Wolseley UK. For those of you who know, that's part of Ferguson PLC. And over this time, I've worked with several leading consulting firms and got first-hand experience, really, of how they perform in real life. I'm passionate about pricing, and in particular, the impact that it can have on generating value within a business. Before we move into the main presentation, I just want to ask one quick question to understand your views on today's topic. Hopefully you will see the question appear in the polls on the sort of right-hand side of your screen. And the question today is, to what extent have you been disappointed by the outcomes of pricing projects you have experienced? You can choose one answer, and I think there's four things there, and we'll just give everybody a few seconds to read them and pick an answer, and then we'll see what people have to say. I think one person's done it so far. That looks nice. That's more like it. Okay, I'll just give you another couple seconds, and then seems to be settling at sort of somewhat successful. I'll just end the poll there. Interestingly, we ran this poll a few weeks ago, actually, with a group of executives from private equity. As you can see here, sort of 80% of people are in the sort of somewhat successful category. It was actually the other way around. It was more like 80% were in the generally successful category, which I think is indicative of the fact that the private equity community have a lot more confidence in pricing projects. And have perhaps probably got more experience of actually doing them. But either way, whatever the insights in there, I'm hoping this webinar will provide you with a roadmap of how you can improve your success. So starting at the beginning, really, the first element for delivering pricing success is top-level buy-in. It's an obvious statement, but organisations where pricing is not discussed strategically amongst the board often underperform in terms of pricing because pricing is treated far too tactically. That's particularly important in B2B, where there is a lack of pricing transparency, and pricing governance is significantly more challenging given the often decentralized nature of pricing decision making. The C-suite must be aligned and committed to elevating pricing within the organisation. Otherwise, any initiative simply won't be sustained, and we see this all too often. One of the first questions we often ask when trying to understand the extent to which an organisation is good at pricing is, do they have a monthly pricing meeting attended by the executive team? It may again sound simplistic question, but if the answer tells you a huge amount about the business's approach to pricing. It's essential that the board must be bought in and committed to that journey towards data-driven pricing. So if there was one thing that we would recommend, it would be to ensure that pricing is represented around the board table and that it is a standing topic on sort of a monthly discussion. This commitment will drive early stage engagement and buy-in, which is essential to deliver that sustained change in pricing over time. And it sort of neatly brings us on really to the second element, which is around ensuring pricing strategy is linked to the core business strategy. All too often we observe disconnects in B2B businesses across sales, marketing and pricing, often with differing agendas, typically sort of working at odds against each other. For example, it's common to see resistance amongst the sales team driven by fear that pricing policies and frameworks will prevent them from trading in some sort of way. And so framing and aligning pricing strategy as a core element of helping them deliver that sales, margin and customer objectives is really sort of essential to drive that success. So our advice here would be to sort of ensure that you define your core business challenges and align pricing as a way that can solve them. If sales, marketing and pricing are to harness their collective strategic power and deliver the potential, it really is critical that you get that alignment, and that alignment is robust from the beginning. But even when you do have that alignment and that linkage, business strategy, we often observe that the strategic elements of pricing are neglected to a greater or lesser degree, particularly around the customer price proposition, product and competitive price strategies. All these three elements are equally important, but rarely do they receive the same focus as discounting or promotional activity. There's often a really natural jump to focus on pricing the offer, so looking at discounting, elasticities, promotional effectiveness, those sorts of areas. But without a strong strategic foundation, pricing is often seen, again, as very, very tactical. So if there was one piece, again, of advice that we would pose, it would be really to pose those larger strategic questions that relate to the boxes that you see on the left there. In a sales-led B2B organization, often with challenges around opaque market pricing, it really is critical that the pricing offer and architecture for each customer segment are really anchored in the strategy to make sure that it is delivered through. But even when pricing is integrated within the business strategy, disappointment often comes from a lack of ambition. And you really do need to be clear on the strategic ambition pricing will play within the business. The pricing opportunities is often limited by ambition of the management team. Best-in-class organizations make bold pricing moves, and those will transform performance. It's fair to say that the bold moves may appear more risky, but as long as they're grounded in insight, and that's the crucial point, and we'll come back to that later on in the webinar, the risk can be managed. So we observe organizations focus far too much really on the areas of downward pricing pressure, and this limits their imagination. And this lack of ambition creates a feeling of sort of pricing failure and disappointment because the ambition wasn't high enough in the first place, and often far too much is left on the table. Now, to tackle this, we would recommend creating and using frameworks and scorecards which focus and really force the management team to assess a broad range of pricing factors to reach a balanced view on the price change opportunity. So typically, a team will fixate about the competitive landscape and nothing else. And it's critical, really, to break everybody out of that mind trap and the associated behavioral biases that come with it to drive that ambition. So even when market price information is difficult to get hold of, as is often the case in sort of a B2B world, these frameworks can facilitate a robust pricing discussion and enable the business to make bold pricing moves, which have the collective buy-in across the organization. In our experience, it's not unreasonable to move a sales team from a position of feeling that the only solution is pricing reductions to positively supporting double-digit price increases. Now, the first three elements that I talked about were really about sort of setting the strategic direction for pricing. The next four are the key enablers of what we're calling the key enablers for pricing success. And one of the most important ingredients for pricing success is unsurprisingly, a robust data strategy with strong data governance. Data requirements should be prioritized based on sort of the agreed use cases. And you should really only collect the data you need to deliver the project that you're working on, the project that's in hand at the moment. And we recommend starting, if at all possible, with the most easily accessible data on the most easy to access systems and very much build from that particular point. You can really can spend a huge amount of time, effort and money on collecting data that ultimately you never require. And you're sort of boiling that sort of proverbial data ocean. And a key risk that we often observe is the extent to which people really do quite obsess around getting their hands on as much data as possible. And we would very much recommend that you concentrate and you very much focus on the data that you need. Another risk that we often observe is the extent to which pricing work can ultimately be embedded within the business due to a lack of IT infrastructure or poor data quality to support the ultimate change. So for example, here in B2B, we often need to enable the sales team with price guidance. And this needs to be delivered seamlessly to where the pricing decisions are made through be it iPads, laptops, or whatever. And getting that IT infrastructure in place is really important. So our advice really will be to focus your scope on delivering with the data that you can rely upon, and build your future aspirations into a pricing roadmap, which is supported and embedded within that IT strategy. Now, another crucial foundational element in the business is the business sort of engagement strategy. And a lack of engagement is a key risk in any consulting project. That's no secret, but it is critically important in a pricing project, especially in an immature pricing organization. So being upfront and clear about your business engagement strategy is critical for the success. And as consultants, we can be a bit over-focused really on sort of deriving insights and defining solutions, often to the detriment of engagement. Now, as in all cases, some stakeholders are significantly more important than others, particularly within B2B. And the sales team are very, very important in any B2B environment to delivering the value, and they really must be at the heart of your engagement strategy. Overcoming that sales team skepticism and fear does require a dedicated and ongoing approach to building trust, and they should be involved in that process from the very start. We find that starting projects by sitting down with each stakeholder, interviewing them, asking them about their personal objectives is invaluable and essential for success. And also being clear about the unique cultural barriers which also contribute to potential resistance is really important, especially in a decentralized pricing organization. So our advice here would be that it's never too early to start engagement, and the process, quite frankly, it never ends. And the more immature the pricing organization, the more resources will be needed to deliver that success. Now, we've specifically called out sales team engagement as it really is essential in a B2B environment. It's critical to be transparent with the sales team from the very, very start and take them on the journey, on the pricing journey with you. They should be seen as partners in the process, and we would very much recommend employing what we call the 4 E's approach. So firstly, you've got to engage with the sales team. The most important decision, certainly for myself, that I ever took when I began the pricing journey within Wolsey was to involve the sales team from the very, very start. They were the only ones who could deliver value, and it was essential that they were part of that whole journey. And ultimately, that journey was sort of co-created with them. Now, secondly, you need to enhance their capabilities through new sales tools, which will bring to life the pricing insights. We'd often call this sort of final mile enablement, as the sales team need the pricing insight, the point that they make the pricing decisions. So at the counter or on that particular sales call. And the sales capability training really is a core element of the engagement strategy, and should include negotiation, wargaming, sales support, materials, sort of objection handling, a whole raft of materials and processes that need to be in place to enhance the sales team capabilities. Thirdly, it's important to empower them to keep making the important trading decisions using pricing insight rather than gut instinct. And the sales team must feel empowered that they can continue to trade and see pricing tools and frameworks as a way of helping them do an even better job than they have done historically. And finally, it's about enabling them to see their performance and the impact through simple KPIs which drive alignment to the business strategy. It really is important also to make sure that the sales incentives are aligned to maximize the pricing impact. The last thing you need is to drive behaviors that are running counter to any pricing strategy that you put in place. This should all be wrapped up in a comprehensive pricing communications plan. So our advice here is do not underestimate the amount of time, effort, and resources to do this well. But when you do it well, truly the results can be outstanding. Now I'm going to hand over to Tim for the final 4 elements.
Great, thank you, David. So the next element is robust insight, and David mentioned this when he was talking about ambition. In a B2B context, we observe that clients often have very large quantities of anecdotal, very rich data. The challenge here is more, that this data has been collected through conversations with customers and it's biased. It's the adage that customers will tell you when you're overpriced, but they'll never tell you when you're underpriced. And these biases, although you're aware of them, can still become pervasive in an organization. You have to be an extraordinarily robust and independent-minded salesperson to be unaffected by customers presenting this biased view on an ongoing basis. And the sales force can become, in effect, an internal champion for the market, and vocal. And of course, they are seen as the experts because they are the ones that talk to customers, but it frequently leads to underpricing. And so insights here are absolutely essential to counterbalance this. So when I say insights, I mean those that are gathered from the market, and this can be analysis of previous price moves. It can be price tests, and very often it's market research. And market research is often needed in environments where you haven't got, and unlike in B2C, where you typically have vast quantities of data, previous price moves that you might be able to look at in terms of and analyzing those previous volume effects. It often is the case in B2B that you don't have that same level of data. Sometimes you do, but market research can be very effective for that reason. If done well, it provides deep and strong insights and counterbalances these natural internal challenges. And it's often the lack of these insights in the left-hand side of this slide that quells consideration and modeling of alternative. It frustrates and diminishes the focus on pricing opportunities, and they're ignored. And therefore we find strong external insights provide more clarity and confidence, and it balances that internal perspective and addresses underpricing. I mean, insights are really powerful when you are able to combine an understanding of pricing behaviors, which is more often not done through analyzing previous price moves or price testing, with an understanding of how your customers think, the attitudes they've got, the buying processes, the decision-making processes that they have. And that's more often gathered through market research because it's about asking them rather than observing them. So that's the last enabler. We've now got 3 success factors which focus on delivery and execution. The first of these is adaptability and flexibility. And even with the best project planning, it's likely the plans are going to be somewhat wrong. This could be as a result of a range of things, but the most frequent of this is missing pricing data, but it might be systems challenges or availability of key people. And the danger here is that both parties, whether the consultant and client, become over-focused on delivering the original plan. To change the plan is sort of almost an admission of failure, when in fact, of course, the really, really important thing is the outcomes. And so the challenge here is how do you sort of put something in place which leads to you challenging yourself and course correcting. So you need a flexible approach. We recommend having some kind of review point a few weeks into a pricing project with the express objective here of working out how to change plans. And the explicit question should not be, do we have the right ones, but in what way are our plans wrong? What have we learned and how should we change? We also recommend on this that because data challenges are often the thing that throw it out, you try and get an understanding of that as soon as possible in the planning process. Okay, this particular slide here then is an example of where actually the emphasis of a project is changed. You see this sort of the elements here of insights, rules, tools, methods, training, and piloting. This project we started by thinking it was going to be very important to look at the current levels of discounting and price and to derive the sort of errors or the places where there's an opportunity to adjust them. And it could be quite an analytical project to then put in place some new rules and tools to help that happen. In fact, as we got into the data and the processes in more detail, we found that the project should be less about refining what there is and more about building something new. And this is an illustration of how the balance of a project changes as we get into the data. Okay, now the 9th one is about the implementation of and execution. It's really, really critical to have a focus on this from the start, and it's often overlooked. And I think, quite frankly, consultants can be quite guilty of this. And this is because you naturally enjoy and want to look at what the solution is and come up with the best possible solution. And often work is sold on that basis. But when we looked at ourselves and looked at the work that we've done 4 years ago, and looked at the projects that were most successful and the ones that had been a little bit disappointing, we saw a very clear theme. And the clear theme was that it wasn't that we'd not come to the right solution, it was that we'd handed over the work too early, before all of the elements and some of the things that David's talked about had not been put in place. And so the implementation and the execution of those changes didn't go to plan. And so the whole process of handing over is inherently risky, because effectively you're handing over to somebody else who's got different inclinations, different capabilities. They may or may not have the bandwidth. And so as a result, we now spend a lot more time thinking earlier in a project and being more involved in the implementation process. And it's just constructive, because it's the collaboration of the two parties that works best. So we recommend ensuring you sort of understand, challenge, and stress test your plans on execution early on in the planning process, and embedding all of those processes within the project. And we also recommend, if you're using pricing consultants, think carefully about when they stop and how they stop and how the handover process works, and ensure that that's very robust. We've found that actually long-term relationships with clients have been very rewarding, and have been the easiest situation for us to deliver greater value. Okay, so the last of the 10 lessons is about engaging with consultants and how to best do that. Clearly there's an element here of understanding yourselves and understanding what you feel you're good at and where you've got gaps, and ensuring that you're focusing consultants in those particular areas. A second recommendation is around the length of the project. And sometimes we see there's a danger of trying to do a lot of work too quickly in consulting. And there is, of course, a learning curve for both parties when a new piece of work or a new relationship is struck up. And it's important to allow that learning curve to be transcended before you've got too far into a project. So just watch out for trying to achieve everything in a sort of 2 to 3 month timescale. And we recommend sort of planning a longer solution, which could be a much slower burn. In particular, though, we've got 5 pieces of advice. The first one is take up references. Consultants can be good at selling, but actually the critical question is, what have they done before? How well did they deliver it, and what's their reputation? Secondly, challenge who will be doing the work. Engage the consultants, as I've said, over a longer time period. And in particular in B2B, make sure that they've got a real depth of pricing, and it's in B2B pricing, and the right kind of B2B. And we believe when it comes to B2B pricing, it's less about the sector experience that somebody's got. It's much more about the scale. So we see a lot more commonalities between large customers across different sectors and the way that B2B pricing works than we do similarities between large customers and small customers within a sector. So when you're looking at people's B2B pricing experience, sort of think about the nature of your B2B relationships, whether they're large, involved selling processes face-to-face, and they're at the larger end and they're big commercial negotiations, or whether they're at the smaller end, which sometimes are much more like retail pricing relationships. And finally, try to understand the culture and ethos of the organization you're working with. We believe the balance of consulting and industry experience is much more important in B2B, where some of the practical elements that David's talked about around implementation, engagement, and working with people and collaboration, these are strong skills that people learn in industry. And B2C pricing can be much more about coming up with the right solution, putting it into a computer and transmitting that out to various locations around the country, around the world, when B2B pricing can be quite different. So have a look at that balance of consulting and industry experience in the team you're engaging with. So when clients ask us how do we deliver success, we tend to focus on three things. One, depth of pricing expertise. Two, outcome orientation, because we believe that that's the most important thing. It drives lots of great behaviors, and it means that you get quite practical. And implementation, as I've said, we hear too many examples of projects falling down because of implementation. So if you've got those three, which are fundamentally about one, the capability to deliver, two, the determination to succeed, and three, having the correct focus, then we think you're set up for good outcomes. And I'm now going to hand back to David.
Thanks, Tim. So in summary, we believe that pricing must be seen as a strategic lever by the top team, and pricing strategy must be aligned and anchored as a way to solve business challenges. It really is important to challenge and stretch the management ambition, as we sort of demonstrated earlier, using balanced frameworks to extract the maximum value and employ a robust data strategy to underpin that sort of pricing roadmap. It really isn't never too early really to start engaging with the business. And don't forget the 4 E's of sort of engaging, enhancing, empowering, enabling the team, particularly when you're dealing with the sales team. Robust insights provide greater clarity and confidence, but it really is essential to focus on the outcomes and flex your approach accordingly to make sure that you get what you are actually looking for. And ensure that you've got a robust execution plan to make sure that you engage with the right consultants as well, to make sure that you speed up that value to that sort of delivery of value, which is ultimately what we're all trying to do. As Tim said earlier, these elements are not radical, but we do believe that this is a great checklist, and all too often we know that many of them are certainly not followed. So now we've had a chance to sort of share our thoughts on what delivers a successful pricing project. We just thought we'd just ask one final question if we can. So again, just choose one answer. And sort of the question is, based on what you've heard today, which of the following would you consider the most important in delivering a successful pricing project? I think there are 5 answers there. And again, I'll just give you a few seconds to choose. We've got top level buy-in, adequate ambition, engagement across the team, particularly sales team, robust insights, flexible approach. Again, it's looking like that we are. Again, I'll give you a few more seconds. Still coming in. Okay, I will end it there. So I end it there. Again, a very different result to what we observed for the private equity executives a few weeks ago, where top level buy-in was by far the largest thing, most important thing from their perspective, which again I think is more to do with the fact that they are managing portfolio companies. I would tend to agree with you, everybody here, with 64% have said engagement. Certainly in my experience, the most important element here is about engaging across the business and embedding this change. This has to be done through the sales team, and the engagement, quite frankly, the success of the project will be driven by how good you are at engaging. So thank you for that. So we'd like to sort of thank you for listening, and we'd like to ask a few, open it up for some questions. You want to put the questions in, anyone's got any questions, just write them in chat and we'll, Tim and I will try and answer them. Okay, so I think, Tim, the first question I've got is, what were the characteristics of your most and least successful pricing projects in B2B?
I think there's an element of most successful is there has to be an opportunity. So some clients genuinely have a bigger opportunity than others. Yep. So when I think about our most successful projects, there's been a significant opportunity to move price. I think then the other element I'd say is that we've got people's hearts and minds and excitement and ambition to move price as well. So, inherently there's the opportunity there, but we've been able to bring insights to the table to give people the confidence to make the moves. They've then felt excited about it. They've had the confidence to do it, and they've then followed through and done it.
Okay, and I think I'd sort of build on that. I think for me, the most successful projects was when you had that alignment through the organisation. So you had the board buy-in, all of the senior management, and everyone was committed through the strategy, and all of the different elements of aligning the business strategy and sales team KPIs, and all these things are all working together harmoniously. And then pricing, actually, the changes were actually sustained in within the business. And just moving on to the least successful, so I'll come back to you, Tim, in a second. But for me, the least successful was really when we tried to do the engagement in a particular business unit by conference calls and PowerPoints, because it was a very disparate audience with branches and things all over the country. We thought that was the sensible thing to do. It wasn't. And very much we realized that very, very quickly, that we were maybe getting a small number of people on side, but the reality was we had to change tack, and we did. And we went through the place of actually lengthening the period of time, increasing the number of sort of interventions that we had, actually getting people together regionally, face-to-face engagement sessions, and actually sort of turning it around. And that way we got people on side, we could explain things to them, we got their trust, and things built from there. So that was, for me, turning around a least successful.
Yeah, I think one least successful one was, going back to the point, there just wasn't the opportunity there. We actually found that we did quite a sophisticated piece of analysis with them, and it was the one time we've done a piece of analysis and found that their pricing was pretty much bang on the mark. And they didn't know their pricing. Their judgment was absolutely spot on. So I think we were all a bit surprised by that. But inherently, the opportunity just wasn't there that we were hoping for and expecting. It's happened once, not where we wanted to be.
Second question, I'll try and answer this one first, give you time to reflect. So, how do you overcome sales team mistrust of pricing change? Again, I think for me, this is around sort of building a partnership and engaging. It really needs to be felt that it's not being done to them. It's sort of being done with them. And I think if you can get that sort of ethos, then you're onto a winner, to be honest. That sort of engagement piece is critical. Sort of listening to people's fears, taking feedback, being prepared to change your views and perhaps even your direction, I think is really, really important. And one of the little tricks that certainly I have used is getting, I call them naysayers, but basically some of the most negative people in the organisation towards pricing change, people who believe that there isn't very much opportunity, and actually bringing them very much into the fold and using those as sort of peer examples, and using that sort of peer pressure pricing champion type role to get people, to get everybody on side. I've seen it done. I've done it myself, and it can be immensely powerful as a mechanism for engaging everybody behind it, and really making those first steps, which everyone's got to make to start this off. Tim, anything from you?
No, I mean, I'd broadly agree with you. I think it is broadly about listening to people. I think the fear stems from they think they might be put in a position where they're expected to do something that they won't be able to. And so that comes down to listening to them, understanding their concerns, and that therefore may be about adjusting the targets because they're unrealistic. It may be about giving them the tools. It may be about giving them the skills. It may also be about incentives. But generally speaking, I think you can assume that somebody is behaving rationally. If you think they're not, then you don't understand all of their sort of motivations and the keys to get to understand that and address it.
I'm going to throw this one to you. to start with. So this is another one's come through the chat. So how do you encourage contract managers to price against market rather than cost plus when they are targeted against EBITDA?
Well, yeah, if they're targeted against something and you want them to do something that doesn't align with that, then you've generally got a problem. I think there's a fair adage which is that salespeople act in line with their incentives. And we were talking to a company last week, and they said, "Well, do you think as a result of your work, we'll need to change the incentives?" And it's like, well, if as a result we're asking them to do that something is not aligned, then yes, you've got to get those aligned. But I think as a generalization, getting salespeople to deliver something, perform in a certain way, is partly about winning their hearts and minds by giving them the rationale, the belief, but it's partly about giving them the skills, and it's partly about getting them the incentives. So you've got to think about all three of those things.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think I'll just take one more question. There's another question here, which is, at what stage of the project would you start the execution work stream to ensure effective execution? If I pick that one, I think you can never start that one. You need to be thinking about that from the very beginning. Clearly, there's various phases around research that have got to come first, and lots of analytics, but actually getting the team together who are ultimately going to be implementing this and executing it and involving them along the process. So you're getting input and feedback about and evolving your thinking about how you're going to take the insights that you're getting through the project and how you can bring those to life. The sooner you can get that sort of execution work stream and group of people thinking about it, in my experience there, that is definitely the best things to do. Do you agree with that, Tim?
Leading question.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever done it too soon.
No, I agree.
I think the natural inclination is to come to it when you've got these other things sorted, and I think you should always be pushing yourself to do it sooner. And I think the fact that we've never done it too soon is reflective of that. The sooner you do it, the better, generally.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, I'm conscious of time. I think a couple of minutes before we're due to wrap up. So if anyone has got any further questions, then please email Tim, myself, Guillaume, by all means, and we're more than happy to pick those up via telephone or via email. So please do that. Q&A. We'd like to remind you, as Tim said at the beginning of the webinar, really, that our next webinar is on capturing value through commercial model redesign, and that's scheduled for next week, I think next Wednesday at 3 p.m. So again, we'd look forward to you hopefully joining us for this webinar. I believe that Julian might be putting that into chat in terms of the link so you can directly line up to that. So just look out for that one over the next few minutes. And really, that's all I'd like to say. I think so. And finally, sort of very many thanks from myself for the time this afternoon, and I hope you've all enjoyed the webinar. Tim, would you like to say anything?
No, I'd just like to agree with you. Thank you very much for attendance, and
thanks for your time.
If you do have any questions, or we can help with anything, please do follow up with an email.
And hopefully see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.